Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 15th, 8:30 a.m. Project Homekey 2.0 info session. I'm Andrew Henning, but I'm actually going to turn it over to my co-host here, Howard Schwartz with the County of Marin, to get us started.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Howard Schwartz. I'm with the whole person care team in the county. I've been working on the challenges of homelessness over the last 5 years in the county. Today, the topic is California's Project Homekey. You may have heard about this project. We're going to tell you more details about what we've done this past year and what's coming. The first round of Homekey launched last summer, and Marin successfully acquired 2 properties, one in Corte, Madera and one in San Rafael. Both of those properties were interim housing initially. They're interim housing, and they're going to be converted to what we call permanent sites with 66 new units of permanent supportive housing. If you haven't heard the term permanent supportive housing, it's both a unit of housing as well as supportive services like housing case management, housing navigation, and other kinds of support. The governor has requested a second round of Homekey funding, $750 million this time. And we are anticipating that this would be available at some point, and Marin would like to participate. And so we're doing these educational sessions to share our knowledge about the program with you. At the last count in January 2019, there were over 1,000 residents of Marin experiencing homelessness. And Project Homekey is one of those great things that we can do to really address homelessness and get people housed. Simply put, it will deliver more units of housing to our community, and I'll give you a little bit more information about how many units we've increased in the last few years. Many of you have been seeing a lot more homelessness during the pandemic, and that's we don't know yet exactly how much that's changed until we get to do a new count, but it's also made it much more visible because of the pandemic. We're here to have a discussion to explain to the community how we can get ready for this funding and what it means. Marin was one of the, I believe, the only county to reduce chronic homelessness from 2017 to 2019. So we're doing something right, and we want to continue that process. In essence, we've done that by increasing the units of housing for folks. In 2015 in Marin, we had 193 units of permanent supportive housing, and we've increased that over the last 5 years to 589. That's a huge jump through the effort of a coalition of the county, nonprofits, as well as our innovative Marin Housing Authority. So we really we've really done some good work, but as is obvious to everybody, we have a lot more work to do. I'm going to now turn it over to Andrew Henning. Andrew, I've worked with for the last 4 or 5 years. He's been really key in this transformation. He previously was working with the city of San Rafael, leading its strategy around addressing homelessness. And he's now director in our Opening Doors organization, which is a private-public partnership of funders and policymakers across Marin that are dedicated to addressing chronic and veteran homelessness. Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Howard. That was a great overview of our work over the past few years and what we might be looking forward to with Project Homekey. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We have a presentation for you today with some more information about actually kind of reiterating some of what Howard shared, and then also going into more detail about Homekey. I did just want to share here for contact information. If you'd like to reach out to either me or Howard, you can see our email addresses here. And then also, I won't linger here too long, but if you want us to drop those in the chat during the presentation, maybe Howard, you could drop that in the chat. If you want to reach out with any questions or feedback that you don't feel comfortable maybe presenting today during the meeting. So a couple quick housekeeping items. First, this meeting is being recorded right now. All of the sessions that we're doing, all 10 that are currently scheduled, are being recorded and will be posted online. Following the presentation itself, we'll be doing Q&A through the chat. So that'll be your chance to answer any or ask any questions, and Howard and I will do our best to field answers. We're also going to have a link to a, a feedback survey at the end of the presentation. And that will be your chance to also provide feedback about Homekey criteria and possible Homekey projects. I did want to note here that this presentation is primarily focused on Project Homekey. We're going to touch a little bit on homelessness, but this isn't necessarily a forum to talk about homelessness in Marin overall. Again, we can try to field some questions about it, but it's really going to be focused on housing. I don't anticipate this. I think we've got good controls in place, but I did want to note if anything kind of weird happens with the Zoom, I have everyone's email address, and so we can end the session and I will follow up and we can reschedule. And then lastly, just so you know, there is a pretty robust FAQ and information available on the county's website. If you go to marincounty.org/main/homekey, or you can even just Google Marin County Homekey and you should be able to find it. There's a lot of information that's being updated from both Homekey 1.0 and Homekey 2.0. In terms of an agenda for today, we're doing welcome and introductions right now. We're going to talk briefly about homelessness in Marin, a little bit about opening doors, and then most of our presentation will be focused on Homekey 1 and Homekey 2. So to kick us off, and I think Howard gave a really nice primer to this, I have a 45-minute version of this presentation. So I'm going to give you the five-minute version of our kind of overall strategy to address homelessness in the community. And this change, like Howard said, really began about 5 years ago in 2016. And at that time, especially in San Rafael, there were a lot of challenges with unsheltered homelessness. And we really came to this fundamental insight. There was a lot of background to how we came to this insight, but the fundamental insight was that most of our challenges with homelessness were stemming from a small group of people experiencing long-term chronic homelessness. And so if you were to think about the spectrum of people that are temporarily, briefly homeless, who's actually the vast majority of people that become homeless, to people that are long-term chronically homeless, we find that the community cost to local taxpayers rises exponentially for people that are experiencing chronic homelessness. And then I think also just morally, ethically, we find that these are the most vulnerable people in our community, or some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Studies have found that people experiencing chronic homelessness pass away on average 25 years earlier than their housed peers, not from acute weather incidents or other things like that, but from long-term chronic health issues that go unaddressed. And so what we found back in 2016 is that we had a pretty effective system in Marin, but it was really focused on this part of the curve. We didn't have a really robust suite of solutions for people that were chronically homeless. And so in 2015, 16, 17, we really hit the road. We went up to Sonoma County, down to the peninsula, to San Jose, to the East Bay, really trying to learn what other communities were doing. And we took our policymakers and our nonprofit leaders and really tried to learn as much as we could. At the same time, and I'm glad Howard's joining today because he was integral in our early systems mapping work. But Howard and I took a stab at trying to map out what is the actual lived experience of people experiencing chronic homelessness. If homelessness is in the middle of this map and being housed is on the outside, we had created this convoluted web of services and programs to get to housing. And the result was that a lot of people never made it. And to really simplify this cycle, we had people that were inherently difficult to serve because of chronic health issues, behavioral health issues, traumatic brain injuries. They were failing out of our programs because of even just small barriers. They were becoming more distrustful. They weren't seeking help, and they were getting worse. And so in some cases, there were people who had been homeless in our community for 40 years, trapped in this cycle. And so what we came to realize from all of our tours is that we didn't need just another program to address mental health or a program to address substance use. We really needed a new process for addressing the unique needs of all these individuals. And so what we did is we formed a pilot program that was based in San Rafael called the Homeless Outreach Team. That program's now been named a statewide best practice by the League of California Cities. And the idea was that we brought all these different providers together, the city, the county, nonprofits, and we focused on a small group, no more really than about 15 people at a time, of the most visible, vulnerable people experiencing chronic homelessness in San Rafael. And we said, we have one goal: to get these people housed. And what we kind of stumbled into was this concept of housing first, which has become a national best practice for solving homelessness. And the idea is you basically take very high needs people and put them directly into housing. And as counterintuitive as that might seem, it's actually 200% in some cases more successful than just having people navigate this maze, which had been our status quo. And again, it worked. And so for the first 18 months of this program, we housed 23 of the most visible, vulnerable, chronically homeless people in San Rafael. So fast forward to October 1st of 2017, we really wanted to scale and accelerate this work. And Howard used that word a lot a long time ago, and I love it. Just how do we keep accelerating and scaling our work? And so there's a lot more detail here, but and if you're curious, we have now joined a national coalition called Built for Zero, which has taken that by name list concept that we piloted with the HOT program, and they've basically showed us how to make that a county-wide strategy. We call that program coordinated entry, but it's basically using this same kind of vulnerability organizing principle to prioritize housing for the most vulnerable. And through this coalition, we're seeing that there are communities that are actually ending chronic homelessness, ending veteran homelessness. And so we've gotten a lot of guidance from them. And so we, like I mentioned, October 1st of 2017, we launched this kind of strategy as a county-wide approach for addressing homelessness. And so the impact is that, as Howard mentioned, from just 2017 to 2019, we saw an almost 30% reduction in chronic homelessness. As of today, since October 1st of 2017, we've housed over 320 people. This stat's a little bit out of date, but our retention rate is currently 94% for all those people that we've housed. And at least speaking for San Rafael, for people that were previously homeless to then getting housed, we've seen massive reductions in criminal justice and healthcare utilization for those folks. So really a lot of our kind of hypotheses in the beginning have really bared out as being true. So how did we do that? What's kind of amazing, and I think makes our community a little bit different than a lot of others, is that we've been very reliant and we've had a really deep partnership with our housing authority to connect Section 8 vouchers with intensive services and then finding scattered site rental units throughout the county. So we've housed people from Mill Valley to Novato, Larkspur to even as far as Inverness through scattered site rentals. But ultimately, we know that we also need more housing in general in order to really meet our goal. And so over the past few years, some of these projects have started to bear fruit. Victory Village, for example, was a project, an affordable housing project for seniors in Fairfax. We were able to carve out some of those units for our folks. In San Rafael right now, Homeward Bound is rebuilding the Mill Street Center, which will create 32 more units of housing. And so really we want to make sure that in addition to our scattered site rentals, we're creating new units for our most vulnerable people. And that's really where Opening Doors comes in. So in the early days of this change effort, Howard and St. Vincent's and the city of San Rafael and others, we convened this task force called the Marin Chronic Homeless Action Task Force. And the idea was really that, again, using Howard's word of acceleration, how can we accelerate our success by bringing more partners to the table? So from 2017 to 2018, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement by bringing in local city electeds and city management and county leadership, faith-based, business, philanthropy, to really educate them on this housing first model. And what we came to realize is that the biggest value add of this group could be around the housing. And specifically what we've seen is the biggest bottleneck to more housing is having local capital, or basically local money that we can move nimbly and quickly to acquire and rehab units. And so in 2019, MCHAT was reincorporated as Opening Doors Marin as a 501c3 nonprofit that is fiscally sponsored under the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership. And in 2019, our focus was really looking at other successful examples from around the region of communities that had passed housing bonds or housing revenue measures. We spent time looking at the feasibility of doing that in Marin. And ultimately, we felt like there wasn't enough political support to move forward with that. So in 2020, we shifted to focusing on creating a community business plan for what are the resources we would actually need to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And then we were going to focus on private fundraising and philanthropic giving. And then, of course, COVID happened, and then we pivoted to support the county with Homekey 1.0, which I'll talk more about. I did want to say, if you're curious about learning more about opening doors or what opening doors could be, you can go to openingdoorsmarin.org. But I also just wanted to share from our kind of best practice field trips that we took, a couple of years ago. Destination Home is a similar public-private organization in Santa Clara County that has raised at this point now hundreds of millions of dollars to support creating new units and trying to end chronic homelessness in the South Bay. So this is an interesting model of kind of a little bit of where Opening Doors has been and also where it could go long-term, again, potentially. So Homekey 1.0. So in order to talk about Homekey, we have to start with a confusingly named earlier program called Project Roomkey. And so as I mentioned earlier, COVID has changed a lot about homelessness in our community. But when COVID first started and shelter in place first started in March, the following month, the state announced a response to really try to support people that were experiencing homelessness, given all those underlying health issues that I talked about earlier. So in April of 2020, the county launched, or not the county, the state launched a program called Project Roomkey, which provided all the counties, almost all the counties across the state, the opportunity to lease hotels and motel rooms to create non-congregate shelter capacity. So congregate shelter is basically, if you were to imagine a big room with a lot of cots or beds, that's obviously not a good environment during COVID. And so non-congregate is allowing people to be in their own rooms. And so the idea here was to allow short-term interim housing to get people off the street and safe. And ultimately, the program was honestly a fairly huge success. Almost over 22,000 people ended up getting off the street into non-congregate shelter through this effort. And so because of this, within a few short months, as early as June of 2020, the state said, well, hey, if we were able to do this for interim housing, what if we could do this for permanent housing? So the state reallocated $750 million of federal coronavirus relief funding. And then, as I mentioned, in June, they started to signal, hey, we might do like a housing program with this money, similar to Roomkey. And then on July 16th, they came out with an actual funding notification for communities to apply for possible permanent housing projects, with applications due less than a month later. And the funding was very flexible. It could be used for hotel acquisition, motel acquisition, other commercial buildings. And it was really, again, like buy it, rehab it, and just get people inside. One of the big constraints was that units had to be acquired by the end of the calendar year, and they had to be operational within 90 days. And again, like Roomkey, honestly, the impact has been incredible. Across the state, there were 6,000 units that were acquired, and over 9,000 people have been housed through Project Homekey. And so when you think of the fact that California has 150,000 people that are homeless, programs like this actually really do make a huge difference. Locally, and Howard mentioned this, we had two Homekey projects in Marin County. One was in San Rafael, this building, 3301 Kerner, which has created 44, well, it will create 44 units of permanent supportive housing. It's currently being used as the interim Mill Street site as Homeward Bound is rebuilding the project that I mentioned earlier. So we were able to immediately occupy it per the state guidelines, and then it'll be rehabbed later on. And then the other site was the Casa Buena, which is, well, we're calling it the Casa Buena now, but it was a motel in Corte, Madera, which again has created 18 new units plus a manager's unit in Corte, Madera, right next to Marin Joe's. And so with that, I actually wanted to play a short video. I just wanted to acknowledge, the timeline with Homekey 1.0 was very fast. A lot of our affordable housing projects like Victory Village take 3 or 4 years, really, as we try to do that community engagement and, work on the design and the programming. So this was, maybe 10x faster than we're used to moving for housing acquisition. And so understandably, there was a lot of concern from communities about what is this going to look like and what's the impact going to be on our neighborhood. And so what's amazing is that the town of Corte Madera has formed a working group, which Opening Doors is actually facilitating. And that working group has been addressing issues like exterior redesign of the building, factors for success, like measuring the success of the program there, public communication, volunteerism. And so one of the things that group did is put together this video about a month ago, which is a virtual ribbon cutting about the program. So I wanted to play this for you and just see how things have changed a bit in terms of how it was maybe initially perceived and how it's being embraced right now. So I'll play this video for you.
On behalf of Corte Madera's elected officials, staff, and residents, I'd like to welcome you to the Casa Buena, Corte Madera's first permanent supportive housing for those that experience homelessness. This was all brought together by a collaborative effort that included the County of Marin, Catholic Charities, Open Door Marin, town staff, and Corte Madera residents. We're also providing monetary and in-kind donations.
Marin has worked very hard over the past 3 years to address our homeless population. And with the Homekey project in Corte Madera at Casa Buena, we will be able to provide needed housing for 18 of our most vulnerable residents while wrapping all the services the county has to offer around them. I want to thank the community of Corte Madera, their city council, and the Casa Buena Steering Committee for working with the county to make this possible.
When I first heard of plans to build a homeless shelter in Corte Madera, I was very much opposed to it. And it wasn't until I did a bunch of research on my own that I began to realize that permanent supportive housing can be an important solution to the homeless issue we have here in Marin County.
A safe home helps transform lives and creates essential stability, healing, independence, and dignity founded on hope. Our partnership with Marin County through Project Roomkey and Homekey impacts many lives. Together, we strive to end homelessness in Marin.
From Corte Madera to Novato, Larkspur to Inverness, we have successfully housed hundreds of our community's most vulnerable chronically homeless people. Because of projects like this and the support of community members like you, I know we can reach our goal of being the first county in the Bay Area to end chronic homelessness.
One of the ideas we had was to create welcome baskets that could be given to each new resident when they move in. So we sent people shopping for everything from toothpaste to shampoo to snacks, cozy slippers, and grocery store gift cards. And the response from the community was frankly overwhelming. So many people wanted to be a part of this. It really embodies the spirit of Corte Madera as a welcoming place.
So on behalf of Corte Madera, I'd like to welcome our newest residents.
Welcome to Corte Madera!
So as you can see, and I don't think Scott would mind me saying this, but again, I think we've seen that there were people that were very concerned about this project when it was first introduced, and they've really come to embrace it and support it. And it's honestly been kind of amazing. And the hope of this committee, and I'm happy to talk about it more in the Q&A, but this group, which is a really fabulous group of people that we've assembled, they really want this to be a model, not only locally, but really even nationally, for how communities can wrap around these permanent supportive housing projects, provide some, extra oversight, if you will, but really make it a successful part of the community. And I think we've seen this again throughout the state, that projects are ultimately really embraced within the community once they're adopted. So that takes us to Homekey 2.0. So I do want to caveat at this point that there is actually no official Homekey 2.0. A lot of this is kind of speculation about what we're seeing from the state, and we're just trying to be more prepared than we were last time because it was such a surprise. But as Howard indicated, the governor has signaled in his newest budget proposal reallocating an additional $750 million to Project Homekey. We expect that the legislature, they have not voted on this yet. That's why it's still not clear that it's going to actually happen. But we we're basically kind of acting as if it is going to happen. And they could take action as early as next month. And there could be a NOFA because of that as early as next month. So that's why we really have wanted to get out in front of the community now to do these information sessions. We're assuming they're going to be the same programmatic guidelines as Homekey 1.0, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And again, as I've said a couple times just now, we really, unlike the last time, want to get out in front of this and try to get as much feedback and just kind of initial information out to the community as possible. And that's really why the county and Opening Doors are partnering to do this. So assuming the same criteria from the state as last time, so the way the program worked last time is that cities, counties, housing authorities could be the main applicant for a program. So it has to be a governmental entity, but you could also have co-applicants. So like nonprofit housing developers or social service providers, but you have to have a governmental entity as the main applicant. We expect that the funding will be equally flexible for acquisition conversion. That can mean hotels, motels, commercial sites. We've even heard, I think some communities were able to rapidly buy, RVs or other kind of creative housing types. I know even based on the unique nature of our community, there's been interest in maybe buying boats or marina slips or things like that. So again, it's very flexible funding meant for rapid acquisition. We're anticipating that, again, we will have to close escrow by the end of 2021, and that the program will have to be occupied at least 50% within 90 days of acquisition. And then lastly, I haven't touched on this yet, but there is a local funding match. So it's not 100% paid for by the state. And that's actually fairly important. And so I wanted to actually break this out so you could see. So the way the subsidy worked last time is that the way to think about this is per unit acquisition cost. So if the per unit acquisition cost, basically the first $0 to $100,000 per unit, the state covers that in its entirety. For 100,000 to 200,000, it's a 1-to-1 match. The state covers half, the local community covers half. And then for 200,000 to 350,000, it's 1-to-2. So the state covers 50,000, and then the local community would have to cover up to 100,000. You could go higher than this, but above 350,000, it's 100% on the local community. So what this means is, if you were to imagine a 50-unit project costing $200,000 per unit, the state would cover $150,000 per unit, which is about $7.5 million. We would have to contribute $2.5 million. By comparison, if the program or if the per unit cost went up even just $90,000, we would have to pay $5.5 million locally to make that gap work. And so, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm glad we're talking about this in the context of Opening Doors, because we just simply do not have significant local capital to make those kind of matches. That's why Project Homekey is so important, because as you can see, $7.5 million, $9 million, I mean, that's money we just don't have. And in some cases, we don't even have all the match funding to make that work. So it's really important that we find projects that are financially feasible for Homekey. And then on that note, this is sort of our draft local criteria. So where we are in the process is that, and I'll get to this in a second, but the county is going to be putting out an official request for interest from different property owners to see if they're interested in selling their property. We've also been doing some research and trying to find other opportunities as well. But based on that, this is kind of the criteria of what we're looking for what we might ultimately apply for. First and foremost, we want projects that are not in areas of concentrated poverty. Part of that is just, morally, ethically, we don't want to keep crowding housing into already low-income neighborhoods. We want to be able to have an equitable housing distribution across the county. So that means not targeting projects in the Canal or Marin City. And another part there is really, again, financial. The way that we finance a lot of these housing projects is by what's called place-basing Section 8 vouchers. So I mentioned earlier that we've housed a lot of people in just scattered rental units all over the community that have Section 8 vouchers. You can also use a Section 8 voucher to tie it to an individual unit in a housing development. And that's how you make the unit financially viable. And so because of HUD's concerns around, again, crowding low-income housing in already low-income neighborhoods, they do not allow the housing authority to put vouchers in these communities. And so again, financially, there's no way to make these projects work if we don't have those vouchers, because that revenue not only pays for the operation of the building, so keeping up maintenance and other things, which is important to the community, it also pays for the supportive services in a lot of cases, which is critical to making sure that people are successful in the program and not having a broader impact on the community. So that's key. Like Homekey 1.0, we want to apply for a geographically distributed portfolio. It just, again, feels like we don't want to have all of our Homekey projects in one city or town. We want to try to have every city and town be able to participate. And as Fred said from the Corte Madera City Council, what's interesting is that they do have permanent supportive housing in their community. It's just scattered site units like what we had been talking about, but that was their first actual, dedicated site of permanent supportive housing. So it's been amazing to see a community that hasn't had that step up and be able to embrace that. We also, I think what's key too is with Project Homekey is that it's really about acquisition. The funding from the state is for acquisition, but a lot of these sites need to get rehabbed more intensively to actually be housing. There are ways to occupy them as more interim housing, but for long-term conversion, especially for like a commercial property, there's additional funding required to make that conversion happen. And so the way that we have been trying to make that happen is by working with nonprofit developers. So nonprofit housing developers are able to use tax credit financing to bring additional money to the table to pay for rehab and other construction related issues or costs. And so for nonprofit developers, they really need projects that are about 45 units or larger to make it work financially for them. There are some cases, and again, that's why I don't want to just say hard and fast 45 or more, because there can be cases where if, let's say the acquisition cost is lower or rehab's not as intensive, maybe there are ways to do smaller projects, but we really are trying to target projects that are about 45 units or larger because of that need to have these nonprofit developers at the table. Again, as you saw from the math, while the subsidy goes up to $350,000 per unit, we're really looking for projects that are 250 or less. And then we also don't want to have projects that are just in the middle of nowhere. In fact, the Homekey application, there are points awarded for projects that are near grocery, transit, healthcare. So again, we want to make sure that these programs are embedded within the community and people have access to the services that they need to be successful. So next steps. So this is info session 2 of 10. And then we're also doing some other community meetings. We're going to be presenting to the Nevada City Council in, I think, 2 weeks. And I'm sure there'll be other meetings as well that are going to come up. As I mentioned, the county is going to be releasing this request for interest, I think, any day now for possible projects. We're also soliciting project ideas from the community through these info sessions. We're trying to refine the local criteria that I just covered with community input. So that's the point of this session. And then ultimately, once we have a list of projects and we find out, are they for sale? How many units could we get? Could it be occupied this year? I mean, there's a lot of basic due diligence that needs to happen. We would want to run these projects by local funders, like the Marin Community Foundation as an example, and local development partners to decide really which projects are viable, and then ultimately submit applications based on the viability of those projects. So I have a link here in a second. I'm going to also copy it into the chat, and feel free to share this link to anyone, even if they couldn't attend today. But basically, it's some basic information like your name, where you're based, and then feedback about our criteria for this process, factors that would lead you to support a Homekey project, factors that would make you a little bit more nervous about supporting a Homekey project, and then actual project ideas if you have them. And so here is the link. I won't leave this up. I'll just copy it and put it in the chat for you. This is an attempt to make a shorter link out of an already very long, horrible link. So I'll copy that in the chat for you. And with that, that concludes the presentation. So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then Howard and I are happy to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to type those questions into the chat, and we will start answering them. And Howard, if you want to get us started, I will copy this survey link for the group.
Sure. I haven't seen any questions come in the chat yet, unless I missed them, but does anybody have any questions? or comments. You can also make comments, I guess.
Yeah, if you have comments. And we have a small, yeah. So if you have any comments, we can read them out. We did do a session yesterday. I'll just, as people are maybe typing, we did do a session yesterday. We had about 20 folks attend. And there actually weren't a lot of questions. And I think a lot of the questions were hopefully answered in the presentation. So, and then also feel free again, you know, in this forum, this kind of Zoom world that we're in, I know typing out maybe in front of the group, feel free to, you can also always email me or you can email Howard. I see that Howard added those emails to the chat too. Anything I left out, Howard, that you want to add? Anything you feel like would be worth mentioning?
We have a comment. So thanks, Jim, for joining from North Marin Community Services.
Awesome.
I think we covered it. You know, I think, you know, sometimes people have questions about housing first, Andrew, and success of, you know, the philosophy, why it works, and how do we support people. Clay's asking to find near for location to services.
I think it was, I think that's actually accurate. It looks like you typing 1 mile. Howard, I think we had worked on that part of the application. So I'm pretty sure they're wanting services that are within 1 mile of the site. That includes grocery, healthcare, transit.
Transportation. Yeah, they're very specific about that, and they give you points for ability to meet all the criteria.
Yeah. And actually on that note, just to let everyone know, this was pretty detailed, so we didn't include it in the presentation, but the way the program worked last time was it was a first come, first served basis. So that was part of the urgency of getting projects in early. And the way it worked was, I think the total points was like, I can't remember exactly, maybe 200, but basically there was a minimum threshold of points that got you basically in the queue, if you will. So not only did you have to get your project in early, but you had to make sure you had a certain point threshold as well, which basically like met a lot of the criteria of, you know, we have a possibility of getting site control, we have a way to make this work, but then also criteria like this of it's near services, it has ADA accessibility. So yeah, so these things add up in the application to make it more competitive.
I know, Andrew, when we first started this, when we got that fellow who had been in the hills for 40 years housed and stabilized, just to see the lives transformed has been very powerful for all of us working to support this. We have another question. Let's read that. Yep.
Yes. In fact, I think, Charles, maybe we talked at one point. I represent Dash Housing, working with Caltrans to secure surplus sites. Roland Boulevard 101 exit available, except for veto of Fed Highway Department. Dash would work with the county to do a 100-unit village for homeless at cost of about $1,200 or $120,000 per unit. Yeah, so that's great. So Charles, so if you could just fill out the link that we shared in the chat. And there's a way through that survey to submit this project. So it would just be great we're trying to kind of formally track this. If you wouldn't mind just completing that survey, we can add this to the queue and follow up with you about this.
Looks like a great opportunity.
Yeah. And it's also worth noting, Howard and I have been participating. There has been an existing group for a number of years in Marin that actually the Marin Community Foundation has kind of hosted and coordinated that is already looking at, you know, affordable housing opportunities throughout the county. And so even if I did want to just add, even if there's sites that, you know, maybe they don't qualify for Homekey, but it sounds interesting. Like, I mean, this could be a Homekey site, or maybe it's another kind of more long-term project. We want to just add that to the queue. So if you have ideas, we can add that to the queue and keep vetting or pursuing, even if it's not a Homekey site. So that's always an option too.
Andrew, people who want to help support this effort, what do you recommend they do?
That's a really good question. And we got a similar question last night, so I'll try to give a similar answer, which is that at this stage of the game, as I said, we really want to have as much community engagement as possible. So we're doing these info sessions. It sounds like from what I'm hearing, the supervisors are also helping. They're having community meetings and they're talking to their constituents about this. We're doing the Novato City Council meeting coming up. We've got a press release going out to the IJ, trying to blast this out through the city and town mailing list. But we're really trying to get the word out about this is a possibility. It's potentially moving fast, but we really want community input about the types of projects we're looking for. And again, just projects in general, like what are ideas for projects? So at this stage of the game, really helping with that, like helping get the word out about these sessions. More long-term, let's say a couple months from now, as we potentially have applied for projects, again, I think just having, a lot of community participation and as we go through that process. And again, I think just, I would just say what we're seeing is that these projects really I understand the initial, maybe hesitancy around them, but we're really seeing them serve really vulnerable people, have a very positive impact on our broader effort to end chronic homelessness and end homelessness generally. And so I think just, having this county-wide effort, so it doesn't feel like it's just one community having to bear the brunt, it's all of us working together. That's really our goal. And so getting, again, people from all over the county involved in this is really key. And I do want to say, because I think this also came up yesterday, but we can, ultimately, I think it'll depend on like what services are available and different funding streams. But there was the possibility last time of even doing like a family project. So we've talked a lot about chronic homelessness, but I do want to say there are ways to kind of tailor these so that it could serve vulnerable families or other subpopulations. So I just want to put that out there, that it's not necessarily, we can't even guarantee at this point exactly what the population is going to be. It'll likely be very vulnerable people, but it could also be vulnerable families. So I just wanted to note that. So not seeing any more questions, I think we'll go ahead and end the session and give people a couple minutes until your next, if you have a meeting or if you're going somewhere. As I said, this has been recorded, so we will post it online, hopefully by the end of the week. And then also by the end of the week, for the 4 sessions that we're doing this week, I'll send out a copy of these slides and then a link for you as well, if you want to share the link with people. And yeah, other than that, we really appreciate you taking the time out to learn about this program. And thank you, Howard, for joining. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.